Welcome to the Ramana Maharshi International Zoom group based in San Diego, California. Actually, it's based in a suburb called Coronado, and our first questioner comes from Coronado, as do I. Michael James is our guest today for 2 full hours. Ordinarily, we meet every Sunday of the year for 90 minutes with a conversation strictly about Ramana's teachings. Everybody's welcome to join us there, and if you'd like to join us in particular, on the first Sundays of every month when Michael's here and you could pose questions to him yourself, just send me an email to newsguy55@aol.com, NEWSGUI55@aol.com. My name is Ted. That's all you need to know, I guess. And you're welcome to join us on the first Sunday of every month. Can't believe the next meeting is going to be in the month of July. Where is this year gone? Michael, welcome as always. Let's begin now with Marty, a former host of this very program. I believe he actually was the first to invite you to join us.
And he was indeed.
A read. Go ahead, Michael.
You're saying something? Mark, I said he was indeed. When you said he was the first to invite me, I said he was indeed.
We're all grateful that he did.
Yeah.
And that intro, Marty, take it away with your question.
Okay. This question came from the UK group. We were talking about who am I, and a question about mind, prana, and vital forces came up. A basic tenet of Bhagavan's teachings is that the I thought rises from the self. From that I thought, the phenomenal world is projected appearing with God, soul, and the universe included. For the sake of argument, I'll include vital forces with prana. The literature states the mind and prana have the same source, and the prana is a gross manifestation of the mind. That would imply prana is separate from the I thought, yet originates in the mind. The thoughtless or pure mind is the self. Where does that leave the breath? Now, Michael, there's 2 other parts to this. Do you want me to continue, or
yes? If you read the whole thing, and then I'll.
Okay. Bhagavan talks about holding on to the I thought in Atma-vichara because of the direct link from the I thought to the self. If the prana originates at the same place as the mind, the focusing in the breath would lead directly to the self. Is this so? A few paragraphs later, it states, the mind sustains the breath in the physical body until the time of death, at which time the mind envelops the breath and carries it away. Please explain this. How can this be? And where does the mind carry the breath to? There is clearly a direct relationship between the breath and the mind, but it seems like the breath has an almost ego-like existence. All right, over to you, Michael.
Okay, right. What you're referring to, actually, I think in some English translation, it's been split into more than one paragraph, but in Tamil, Bhagavan wrote it all in one paragraph. It is the 8th paragraph of Jnana. To understand what he says in this 8th paragraph, we need to understand why he says it. Why does Bhagavan talk about the breath in the first place? It's only that is Bhagavan's teachings are focused entirely on I, investigating and finding out who am I, what am I actually. So how is this, in what way is what Bhagavan says about the breath relevant to his core teaching of self-investigation? It is not at all essential. It has no, we need not know anything about the breath in order to investigate who am I, because the breath is something other than ourselves. However, there is a connection. This connection is relevant only if we attempt to bring about the subsidence of the mind by subduing the breath. So it's important to understand this is not at all essential. And it's also important to understand what Bhagavan says in context. So I will go through what Bhagavan says in the 8th paragraph. he begins this paragraph by saying, for the mind to cease or subside, except vicharana, there is no other adequate means. Vicharana means investigation. It here refers to Atma-vichara, in other words, self-investigation. So why does Bhagavan say there's no other adequate means to make the mind subside? There are other means to make the mind subside, but they are not adequate. Why are they not adequate? Because any other means to make the mind subside will only bring about temporary subsidence or dissolution of mind, whereas self-investigation is the only way to bring about permanent dissolution. In this context, it's useful to consider what Bhagavan says in Upadesha Undiyā on this subject. In Upadesha Undiyā, because of the context in which Bhagavan wrote it, he wrote a summary, he included a summary of all the principal paths, all the principal spiritual paths. That is the path of karma, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. All kinds of spiritual paths, to a greater or lesser extent, fit into one or other of these categories, or sometimes maybe more than one of these categories. But this is an ancient classification. These are called Chatur Yogam, four yogas. Yoga being used in the sense of spiritual practice generally. One of those four yogas is called yoga. That is the spiritual practice that is particularly focused on subduing mental activity. In other words, the yoga of Patanjali. But more generally, all four of them are called yogas. So there's the path of karma yoga. That is the path of desireless action. And as Bhagavan makes clear in Upadesha Undiyā, that is not actually a path that is separate from bhakti. Because in order to act without desire, there must be some motivation. We wouldn't act at all without some motivation. Normally, we act in order to achieve some result. I'm feeling hungry, so I get up and I go and cook, take something out of the fridge and I cook a meal. Why do I do that? In order to satisfy my hunger. So if we analyze it, all actions are motivated by desire for something. But as Bhagavan points out there, the driving force behind all actions is what he refers to as seeds. The seeds are the vasana, the inclinations. So when we feel hungry, we naturally have an inclination to satisfy our hunger. Because we know if we don't satisfy our hunger, that hunger is going to get more and more intense. And if we stubbornly refuse to satisfy that hunger, sooner or later his body is going to go away. So it's natural for us to try to satisfy hunger. So most actions are driven, are motivated by desire for some result. And because we act in this way, it is self-perpetuating. Because even if we achieve some result, the inclination to achieve that result again or to achieve some other result still remains there. So action is not a means to liberation. Therefore, he says, action done without desire for the fruit, done for the love of, for God, done for God implies done for the love of God. So if we're not motivated by desire for any result, we need to be motivated by something. Our motivation should be love for God. So those actions which we do, not for gaining any result, but for the love of God, is what is, such actions are called karma yoga. Nishkamya karma, it's called. Nishkamya karma means desireless action. We're not seeking any result. We're doing it just for the love of God. And then Bhagavan goes on to discuss the different types of nishkamya karma. We have three instruments of action. We act by mind, we act by speech, and we act by body. So mind, speech, and body, these are the three instruments of action. And the desireless actions that we do for the sake of God by speech, by body, are called puja. The actions we do by speech, for the desireless actions we do by speech for the love of God are called japa. And the desireless actions we do by mind for the love of God are called dhyana, meditation. So he goes through each of these, and he said, by doing desireless action for the love of God, it will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. That is, the desireless action will not give liberation, but it will purify the mind and show the way to liberation, because no action can give liberation. Then he goes through each of these. He says, these puja, japa, and dhyana, in this order, each one is more efficacious than the preceding one. So more efficacious than puja is japa, and more efficacious than japa is dhyana. What does he mean by saying it's superior or more superior? In that the word he uses is superior. What's he mean? He means it's more efficacious. Efficacious in what? In purifying the mind, because that's the aim of all nishkarmiya karma, is to purify the mind. So he then goes through each one. Better than the puja is the japa. And in the verse about japa, he says, better than the japa done aloud is japa done softly within the mouth. And better than japa done softly in the mouth is mental japa. And mental japa is a type of dhyana, a type of meditation. And then he goes on to talk about meditation. Rather than uninterrupted meditation, meditation which is uninterrupted like a flow of ghee is better. That means when he's saying better, he means it's more efficacious in purifying the mind. Why is the uninterrupted meditation like a flow of ghee? Why is that better? Because if we sit for meditation, if we sit to meditate on a name or form of God, if we have love for that name and form of God, our mind will not wander elsewhere. But most of us, if we sit for meditation, we find our mind begins wandering, goes here and there. Because why does it go here and there? Because we're more interested in thinking about other things than we are in thinking about God. So if we are able to meditate without interruption, that means that requires a great deal of love for God. So the extent to which our meditation is uninterrupted is a measure of the extent to which we have love for God. That's why the uninterrupted meditation is better than the interrupted meditation, because ultimately the key to all these things is love of God. So up to this point, up to the point of dhyana, these are all mental activities. These are all karmas, but they're done because they're done for the love of God and without desire for fruit. They bring about purification of mind. But no, they cannot bring about liberation. But then in the next verse, verse 8, Bhagavan mentions the crucial turning point, so to speak, on the path of bhakti. That is up to verse 7, when he's talking about puja, japa, and dhyana. These are all worshipping God as something other than ourselves. If we meditate on a name or form of God, that name or form of God is something other than ourselves. In verse 8, he says, rather than meditation on what is other, meditation on what is not other, in which he is I, is best among all. What does he mean by meditation upon what is not other, in which he is I? That is, what is not other means what is not other than ourself. So what is not other than ourself? Only ourself is not other than ourself. So what he refers to as otherless meditation is self-attentiveness. In other words, the path of Atma-vichara. And in that Atma-vichara, we are meditating on I with the understanding that he is I. He is I means God is I. So God is not something external to us. So long as we're looking outwards, Bhagavan is not at all opposed to worship of name and form, because so long as we take ourselves to be a name and form, God will appear to be likewise. So worshipping name and form is a very good way of focusing the mind and focusing the love. So it's a way of of strengthening our love for God. When the mind is purified to a sufficient extent by worship, by meditating or worshipping a name or form of God, the clarity comes to the mind. But can God be an object? Can God be something other than I? If God was something other than I, then that God is a limited God. Because anything that is other it has to be limited. If God is infinite, then he cannot be other than anything. So God is most immediately and directly present in myself, as I. So meditating upon I is the direct way of meditating upon God. It's meditating upon God as he actually is. So in verse 8, Bhagavan says, of all, that meditation on God as not other than oneself, that of all it is best. Anatinam uttamam, it is the best of all. When he says it's the best of all, he means it's the best of all types of spiritual practice. It's the best of all practices of bhakti, and it's the best of all means of purifying the mind. Then in verse 9, he goes on to say, by the strength of that meditation, he doesn't say that meditation, he said by the strength of meditation, but in the context we have to understand, the meditation he's referring to is the ananya bhava, the meditation on what is not other, in other words, meditation on oneself. By the strength of that meditation, in other words, by the strength of self-attentiveness, being in the state of being, which is beyond bhavana, which transcends bhavana. Bhavana in this context implies meditation in the sense of mental activity. So when we're meditating on ourselves, it's not a mental activity. Meditating on anything other than ourselves is a mental activity, whereas meditating on ourselves is a cessation of mental activity. So by the strength of such meditation, we remain in the state of being, which transcends all mental activity, and that is parabhakti tattva. That is the very nature of supreme devotion. So Bhagavan is there leading us through the path of devotion, which begins with nishkarmiya karma, doing actions without desire for the love of God, which leads to self-investigation, the path of jnana, and culminates in the state of being. So the puja, japa, and dhyana, the path of karma, are the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti. Self-investigation is the advanced stage of the path of bhakti, but it's all the path of bhakti. So Bhagavan deals with that up to verse 9. Then in verse 10, he says, being, having subsided in the place from which we rise, that is karma, that is bhakti, that is yoga, that is jnana. So in other words, he's implying, by this self-investigation, we thereby subside and remain in a state of being. In other words, we remain as we actually are. And being thus is all these four, is the culmination of all these four paths. Then from verse 11 onwards, he begins to talk about the path of yoga, because he's dealt with karma and bhakti. And in the course of talking about karma and bhakti, he brings in the jnana. He shows how these merge into the jnana. He does exactly the same with the path of yoga. In verse 11, he says, when one restrains the breath within, like a bird caught in a net, the mind will also be restrained. This is a means to restrain. So, in other words, by restraining the breath, that is a means to restrain the mind. And the analogy he gives is like catching a bird in a net. So there's a connection between the breath and the mind, as he indicates here. That he explains a little bit more in the next verse. Verse 12, he says, mind and breath are two branches which have knowing and doing. What that means is the respective functions of the mind and breath. The function of the mind is knowing. The function of the breath is doing. Breath here implies not just the actual process of breathing, it implies the entire prana. Prana means all the physiological functions, or let's say prana is the force that manifests in the body as all the physiological, but functions. So we can translate prana as the life or the life force. That is what Bhagavan implies here by the word. Actually, the word he uses here for breath is veer. Veer means the life. So the mind and the life are two branches which have knowing and doing as their respective functions. Their root is one. So they come from a single root. Then in verse 13, he says, dissolution is two, laya and nasa. What is in laya will rise. If its form dies, it will not rise. What that means is there are two types of dissolution of mind. One is laya. Laya means temporary dissolution of mind. The other is nasa, which means destruction, or in other words, permanent dissolution of mind. What is in laya, because it's a temporary state, it will rise again. If its form dies, it will not rise. What Bhagavan indicates here is the aim of spiritual practice is not laya, is not a temporary dissolution of mind. Our aim is nasa, which is permanent dissolution of mind. Because if we attain nasa, if its form dies, then it will not rise. So we want the permanent dissolution of mind. And so how to achieve that? If we're following the path of yoga, of trying to control the breath, can we thereby bring about the destruction of mind? As Bhagavan says in this 8th paragraph of Jnana, which I'll read following this, he said, no, prāṇāyāma cannot give it cannot give mano-nasa, it cannot bring about mano-nasa. It can only bring about mano-laya, a temporary dissolution of mind. Mano-laya means a state like sleep. Sleep is a state of mano-laya. Coma is a state of mano-laya. General anesthesia is a state of mano-laya. The yogic samadhi, Kevala Nirvikalpa samadhi, that is achieved by prāṇāyāma and other such yoga practices, that is also a state of laya. But our aim is nasa. So what he says in the 14th verse is, when one sends the mind, only when one sends the mind, which will be restrained when one restrains the breath, on the investigating path will its form perish. What he implies here is, if we restrain the breath, that's a means to restrain the mind, but it's not going to bring about the permanent dissolution of mind. If we want to bring about the permanent dissolution of mind, the only way is to send the mind on the investigating path. The investigating path implies here the path of self-investigation. So only when we investigate ourselves can we bring about the destruction of mind. Why is that? Because the root of the mind is ego. Ego actually is the knowing element of the mind. So when he said in verse 12, but the mind, mind and life have knowing and doing as their respective functions, what he means there by mind is ego, which is the knowing element of the mind. Ego is a false awareness of ourself. That is, as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body. Because we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we're not aware of ourselves as we actually are, because this body is not what we actually are. So ego is a false awareness of ourselves. In order to destroy it, in order to bring about nasa, we need to, it can be destroyed only by one means, by being aware of itself as it actually is. So long as we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we cannot destroy the mind. The only way to destroy the mind is to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. That is, the correct knowledge of ourselves will dissolve the wrong knowledge of ourselves, and it will dissolve it in such a way that it will never return. So the only means to achieve nasa is by self-investigation. I bring in these verses to show why Bhagavan is talking about prāṇāyāma, because people ask him about the path of yoga. In the path of yoga, as taught by Patanjali, it's It's called Ashtanga Yoga. It's got 8 limbs. One of those 8 limbs is pranayama. But whenever Bhagavan talks about yoga, he always hones in on this one aspect, the pranayama. Why is that? Because that is the key used by yoga to bring about the dissolution of mind. But it can bring about only the temporary dissolution of mind. So this is what, in reply to whatever Shiv Prakasham Pillai asked Bhagavan, this is what the context in which he's talking about breath control, because it's in the context of the practice of yoga. So that's why Bhagavan starts this paragraph by saying, for the mind to subside or cease, here he's implying, he's not talking about the temporary cessation of mind in laya, he's talking about, what he implies here is nasa. So to bring about nasa, except vichara, there's no other adequate means. That's how he starts this paragraph. Then he goes on to say, if made to subside by other means, the mind will remain for a while as if it had subsided, but it will rise up again. That's the second sentence. Third sentence, he says, even by pranayama, pranayama means breath restraint, even by pranayama, the mind will subside. However, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana emerges, the mind will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. Here the clause, wander under the sway of its vasanas, is very important, because when we bring about the temporary subsidence of mind, we are not there in that state of temporary subsidence. In other words, laya, vasanas remain, vasanas are not destroyed. So as soon as the mind rises again, it rises along with all its vasanas, and it will continue wandering under the sway of its vasanas. This is why Bhagavan used to tell a story of a yogi who lived on the banks of the Ganga, and who was very adept in this practice of pranayama. And he was so adept that he was able to go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi very easily because of years and years of practice. So he used to spend long periods of time absorbed in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So in the eyes of onlookers, he seemed to be a great sage, someone who was always absorbed in Samadhi. So he was living on the banks of the Ganga. One person came to him and attached himself to him as a disciple. One day when he woke up from Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he asked his disciple to go and fetch water from the Ganga because he was feeling thirsty. So the disciple went to fetch the water, but when he returned, the yogi had again gone into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So the yogi waited for him to wake up, but he had to wait a long time because, in fact, the disciple grew old and died. The yogi was still in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. He remained in that state for 300 years. When he woke up after 300 years, but his immediate response was, he asked angrily, "Where's my water?" So what Bhagavan pointed out from this, though he had spent 300 years in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the first thought that rose in his mind when he woke up was the last thought that was in his mind before he went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That shows even the most superficial thought in the mind is not destroyed, however many years or centuries you remain in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Because Nirvikalpa Samadhi is just a state of, it's a dissolution of mind, it's a suspension of mind. It doesn't destroy the vasanas, it just dissolves the mind temporarily. And all its vasanas obviously are dissolved along with it. But when the mind rises, the vasanas come with it. So Bhagavan used to tell this story to point out the fallacy of thinking that you can achieve spiritual progress by means of pranayama or by going into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. You can remember, it's very pleasant to be in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, just like it's very pleasant to be in sleep. But when we're asleep, our vasanas are not thereby destroyed. Likewise, in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the vasanas are not destroyed. So that's why Bhagavan says here, when however, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana emerges, the mind will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. Then we come to the bit which, Marty, which you're asking about. I'm sorry about all this background, but it's important to understand this teaching in context. Otherwise, I mean, if we don't understand it in the correct perspective, we'll misunderstand it. So in the next sentence, he says, the birthplace for both the mind and the prana is one. What is the birthplace for the mind? Mind means ego. Obviously, ego rises from our being, from what we actually are. And the prana also rises from there, is the implication. That is the birthplace or the source of both mind and prana. And then he goes on to explain, thought alone is the swarupa. Here, swarupa is not usually in the sense of Atma-swarupa. He's talking about the mind. The very nature of the mind, or the actual nature of the mind, is thought alone. So mind is nothing but thoughts. The thought called I alone is the first thought of the mind. It alone is ego. So what Bhagavan refers to as the thought called I is nothing but ego, which is the first thought of the mind. Why is it the first thought? Because though Bhagavan describes ego as a thought, it is a thought, but it's a thought unlike all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are objects. They're things known by I. So since they're objects, they're jada, they're devoid of awareness. I is the only thought, the ego is the only thought that is endowed with awareness, because ego is what is called chit jada granti. It is a knot formed by the entanglement of awareness and what is not aware. In other words, ego is the thought, I am this body, in which I am is the chit element, the awareness, the sat-chit, the pure being awareness, and the body is jada. So then these two are conflated. When we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, we as awareness are taking ourselves to be something that is not aware. So that is called chit jada granti. So it's a thought because it's anything other than the pure awareness is a thought. Since ego is not pure awareness, it is neither the body nor is it pure awareness. As Bhagavan says in verse 24 of Ullutunaptu, it's something that rises in between as the extent of a body. Since it is aware of itself as I, it is not the body, because the body is not aware. The body is jada. But since it rises, it is not sat-chit, because sat-chit doesn't rise. So ego is neither sat-chit nor the body, but it takes the properties of both, and it is aware of itself as I am this body. So that's what Bhagavan refers to here as the thought called I. And he says that is the first thought of the mind. Why is it the first thought? Because all other thoughts exist only in the view of ego. So without ego, there cannot be any other thought. So ego has to be the first thought. It alone is ego. And then he goes on to repeat again what he had said earlier. From where ego arises, from there also the breath rises up. Therefore, when the mind ceases, the prana ceases. And when the prana ceases, the mind also ceases. The prana is called the gross form of the mind. Until the time of death, the mind keeps the prana in the body, and at the moment that the body dies, grasping it, it goes. That means grasping the breath, the mind goes. Therefore, this is the important point. This is what this paragraph is all about, the concluding sentence. Therefore, prāṇāyāma is just an aid to restrain the mind, but will not bring about mano-nasa, will not bring about the annihilation of mind. So we can achieve mano-laya by prāṇāyāma, we cannot achieve mano-nasa. So having explained all that, now I'm in a better position to answer your questions, Marty. as you say, a basic tenet of Bhagavan's teachings is the I thought arises from the self. Yes, it arises from our own being, from what we actually are, from what Bhagavan would refer to as Atma-swarupa, the real nature of ourself. From that I thought, the phenomenal world is projected. Yes, appearing with God, with God's soul and the universe. Well, the soul actually is the I thought. But when I thought rises, it projects a universe, and because by rising as ego, we separate ourselves from what, or we don't actually separate ourselves. We can never separate ourselves from what we actually are, but we seemingly separate ourselves from what we actually are, because now we are not aware of ourselves as infinite Satchidananda. We're aware of ourselves as this small finite body. So seemingly we have separated ourselves. So we see our own self as something other than ourselves, as God. So when Bhagavan said that the rising of ego produces the appearance of both the world and God, he's not saying we need to understand that in the context of his teachings. He explains it very nicely in verse 4 of Ulladu Narpadu, where he says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? In other words, it's only when we rise as ego and thereby identify ourselves as a form, namely a body, but we are aware of all other forms. When we don't rise as ego, as in sleep, for example, or nirvikalpa samadhi or coma or any other state of manolaya, and also obviously in manonasa, when we don't rise as ego, we're not aware of any other forms. In sleep, we're not aware of any forms. Why? Because we haven't limited ourselves as a form. What does Bhagavan mean when he talks about forms? He's not just talking about physical forms. All phenomena are forms. That is, anything that can be in any way distinguished from any other thing is a form. So what we actually are is infinite. It has no form, because it cannot be distinguished from any other thing, because it is the substance, the reality of all other things, of ego and all phenomena. So what we actually are is formless. So when we do not rise as ego, we do not identify ourselves as a form. Therefore, we remain as the formless reality, but we actually are. And therefore, we're not aware of any forms. It's only when we limit ourselves as a form, but we create the appearance of other forms. So God seems to be something other than ourselves when we limit ourselves. Though it is said in Vedanta, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, that doesn't mean I, Michael, am Brahman. That would be absurd, because Michael is just a small little person. It means what is Brahman? What I actually am is Brahman. My own being, my own fundamental awareness I am, that is Brahman. Not this person is Brahman. So Brahman is not a form, but Brahman is beyond form. So Brahman is what we actually are. When we rise as ego, we take ourselves to be a form, and therefore we seemingly separate ourselves from other things, so that we create the appearance of forms. So God also seems to be a form, so long as we take ourselves to be a form, because we cannot by mind, we can say God is formless, but that's just an idea in the mind. Our idea of a formless God is itself a form. Every idea, every thought is a form. So we cannot conceive of a formless God so long as we take ourselves to be a form. So if we want to experience God as formless, we need to experience ourselves as we actually are. Then we will find God is nothing other than ourselves. That's why Bhagavan said that when we rise as I, we thereby create the appearance of God and world. But God is actually our own reality, our own being, but he appears to be something separate from us because we have separated ourselves by rising as ego. We've not actually separated ourselves, we seemingly separated ourselves. In our experience, we seem to be something separate. Then you go on to say, for the sake of argument, I'll include vital forces with prana. Yes, the word prana actually, in its broadest sense, it means life. So it's not just the breath, it's all the physiological functions and the force that drives all those physiological functions. So I think the best translation of prana is life. And in fact, in that passage, in one place, Bhagavan, when Bhagavan is referring to the prana or to the breath, he used the word veer. Veer means life. It also means breath. So it has got both meanings. But prana is nothing but the vital force. The literature states that the mind and prana have the same source. Here, by the literature, you mean Bhagavan. Yes, Bhagavan does say that. And it's also said in other texts also, but I mean, this is Bhagavan has confirmed this, have the same source. And the prana is a gross manifestation of the mind. Yes, as Bhagavan says there. That would imply prana is separate from the I thought, yet originates in the mind. No, that is not what is meant. Prana is one of the 5 sheaths. But as Bhagavan says in verse 5 of Uludunapadu, Udul Panchakosa Uru, the body is a form of 5 sheaths. That is, when Bhagavan says ego is the false awareness, I am this body, what he means in that context by body is not just the physical form of the body, but all the 5 sheaths. So what are those 5 sheaths? There's the so-called Annamaya kosha, a sheath composed of food. In other words, the physical body, the physical form of the body. The Pranamaya kosha, the sheath composed of mind, of prana, of life. That is the prana, all the everything that manifests in the body as physiological functions, breathing, heartbeat, digestion, everything that distinguishes a living body from a dead body, you can say. So that is called prana. Subtler than, so prana is obviously subtler than the gross body. Subtler than the prana is the manomaya kosha. That is the mind. Here, in this context, mind means the grosser functions of the mind. That is the perceptions, memories, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. These are all part of manomaya kosha. Subtler than the manomaya kosha is the vijnanamaya kosha. Vijnanamaya kosha means the intellect, the buddhi. That is the judging, discriminating, reasoning aspect of the mind. That which can distinguish one thing from another, that is the intellect. And subtler than the intellect is the Anandamaya kosha. Anandamaya kosha means the will, but what is otherwise called chittam. The Anandamaya kosha or chittam consists of what? It consists of all the vasanas. That's why it's called the will. The vasanas are the seeds that give rise to likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. So we can say the Anandamaya kosha consists of all the likes, dislikes, desires, and so on in their seed form. So these are the 5 sheaths that constitute the body, but we now experience as ourself. Whenever we experience ourself as a body, it's always a living body. We never experience ourselves as a dead body. So the prana is already packaged in there because it's a living body. And we also never experience ourselves as a sleeping body. It's always a body that seems to be awake. Even the body we take to be ourselves in a dream seems to be a waking body, seems to be awake. So when the body is awake, functioning within that body is a mind, an intellect, and a will. So all these 5 collectively are what Bhagavan refers to as body. That's why he says in verse 5 of Ulunapadu, the body is a form of 5 sheaths. Therefore, all 5 are included in the term body. So ego cannot rise, stand, or function without grasping a body as I. When Bhagavan talks about this, is how the term grasping is a term he uses in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, in which he describes ego as a formless demon. It's formless because it has no form of its own. But since it's formless, it has no separate existence. So how does it come in? So ego cannot come into existence or stand or flourish without grasping form. So what he says in that verse is, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikkam, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mika ongam, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to grasp form. The first form it grasps is a body consisting of 5 sheaths. And without grasping a body consisting of 5 sheaths, it cannot come into existence and it cannot stand. So does that mean the body consisting of 5 sheaths exists independent of ego? No, because as he clarifies in the next verse, verse 26, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Because as we saw earlier, ego is the thought I, in the view of which all other thoughts exist. So all these 5 sheaths, they're nothing but thoughts. So they exist only in the view of the mind. So when Bhagavan says, grasping form it comes into existence, grasping form it stands, what he expects us to understand, he means by grasping form is that as soon as we rise as ego, we simultaneously project a body and experience it as I. It's just like if we begin to dream, as soon as we begin dreaming, we experience ourselves as a body within that dream, as a person within that dream world. So we are sleeping. When the mind rises, it projects a body, and through the 5 senses of that body, it projects a seemingly external world. So all these things depend upon ego. So when Bhagavan says ego and the prana arise from the same source, well, everything arises from the same source. But as you correctly say, the first thing to rise is ego, and from ego, everything else arises. But that means since everything arises from ego and the ego arises from what we actually are, everything is arising from what we actually are. So in that sense, ego and prana have the same source. So you say, that would imply prana is separate from the I thought, yet originates in the mind. The I thought is, as Bhagavan says, it's the first thought in the mind. So there's no mind without the I thought. He says it very clearly in the 5th paragraph of Jnana. He says, of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. Only after this arises do other thoughts rise. Only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. Without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. What he means here by first person, second person, third person, second and third person means all objects or phenomena. In other words, everything other than ourselves. The first person is ego, the thought called I. So what he's saying is only after ego rises, everything else appears. Without ego, nothing other than ego exists. So ego is the root of everything. But though he says here, but only after ego rises do other thoughts rise, that doesn't mean he's talking here about the causal sequence. That is, in terms of cause and effect, ego is antecedent or prior to all other thoughts, because it's only in the view of ego that other thoughts exist. So ego is the cause, other thoughts are the effect. However, this is a case of simultaneous causation. There are so many examples we can see in the physical world of simultaneously causation. Supposing a car accident takes place, supposing a car hits a tree, and the car obviously will be damaged. So the damage is the effect. The car hitting the tree is the cause. But the two happen simultaneously. As soon as the car hits the tree, the damage occurs. So it is, in terms of chronological sequence, it's simultaneous. But in terms of causal sequence, the hitting of the tree comes first and the damage comes afterwards. Though they occur at the same time, the car hitting the tree is the cause. The damage is the effect. They occur simultaneously, but in terms of causal sequence, the cause comes prior to the effect, though they occur simultaneously. Why I say that, it's important to understand here when he says only after this rises, that means only after ego rises, other thoughts rise. That doesn't mean ego rises and then other thoughts rise. What it means is, as soon as ego rises, other thoughts rise, but the cause for the rising of other thoughts is ego. We can see, I mean, so many places, Bhagavan talks about simultaneous creation. In Ulladu Napadu, in verse 7 of Ulladu Napadu, he says, though the world and awareness arise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by awareness. Here, what he means by awareness is ego or mind, because the pure awareness doesn't rise and subside. So the awareness that rises and subsides is only ego. So what he means here by awareness is ego. So the world and ego, they arise simultaneously. But though they arise simultaneously, it's only by ego that the world shines. In other words, it's only by the mind that the world is known. So without mind, there's no world. So though their rising occurs simultaneously, but in terms of causal sequence, the rising of ego comes first. That's why he says, only after ego rises, everything else rises. So everything else includes the prana. It includes all the five sheaths, and which includes the prana, and of course it includes the world, everything else. So it's only when we rise as ego, but we project a body consisting of five sheaths, and also project a seemingly external world. So Bhagavan doesn't imply that prana exists independent of the thought called I, because he says there, they both arise from the same source, and he also, in other places, he said they arise simultaneously. Why? Because as soon as we rise as ego, we project a body and take that body to be I. It's not a dead body, it's a living body, so prana is there. So we cannot rise as ego without projecting a living body and taking that living body to be ourselves. Then you go on to say the thoughtless or pure mind is the self. Yes, because the thoughtless mind is not mind at all, it's that pure being. Where does that leave the breath? The breath is part of the body, which is a projection of ego, of the mind. Bhagavan talks of holding on to the I thought in Atma-vichara because of the direct link from the I thought to the self. Yes, correct. If the prana originates from the same place as the mind, but focusing on the prana would lead directly to the self. No, that is not so. Because the I thought is ego. That is the subject. The prana, like all other things, are objects. The prana is something known by us. The prana doesn't know anything. So we are the knower, the prana is something known. So by attending to any object, we are facing away from ourselves. So it cannot lead us back to ourselves. The only way to return to our real nature is to turn our attention away from all objects back towards the subject. The subject is ego. The nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than itself, but to subside when it attends to itself. So That's why Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, talking about ego, he says, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. If sought, it takes flight. Such is the nature of this formless phantom ego. So, when he says grasping form, since ego is formless, all forms are things other than itself. So all objects or phenomena are forms. So it's only by attending to things other than ourselves, to objects or phenomena, but we rise, stand, and flourish as ego. So if instead of attending to any object, we try to attend to the subject, ego will subside. That's what he means by saying, if sought, it takes flight. That is, if the ego seeks to know its own reality, the ego seeks to know who am I, it will thereby subside. So only by attending to ourself will we bring about the permanent dissolution of mind, manonasa. That's why he says in that 8th paragraph, but prāṇāyāma, restraining the breath, and it also applies to attending to the breath, can be a means to restrain the mind, but it cannot bring about the destruction of the mind. People who are very much interested in following the path of yoga, in following pranayama, sometimes Bhagavan would say, if you want to control the breath, there's an easier way than all these. If you want to strictly follow pranayama, you need to be properly trained in it, because there's a proper way of doing it. But Bhagavan said that actually you don't need to go into all that complication. If you want to use the breath in order to quieten the mind, all you need to do is to attend to the breath. If you attend to the breath, the breathing it calms down the breathing, and the mind will also calm down. But that's not a real spiritual path. It's just a way to calm down the mind. So in day-to-day life, if someone is much agitated, if they've had a great shock, maybe they've had a bereavement, or they've just seen something horrible and they're in a state of shock, or they're much agitated, much worried about something that they're anticipating happening or something. One way to calm down the mind is simply to watch the breath. If we watch the breath, that automatically the breathing calms down and the mind calms down with it. If your mind is very agitated, you probably won't notice it, but when the mind is agitated, the breath is also, we breathe faster, we maybe breathe more quickly, so short breaths. Whereas if we're calm, we tend to breathe more calmly and more deeply. So by simply observing the breath, that's a way to calm down the mind. So the worst agitation of the mind can be calmed by watching the breath. This is a technique that's used in, particularly in Buddhist meditation, but in many forms of meditation, they teach this as a preliminary technique for calming down the mind. Is this necessary on the path of self-investigation? No, it is not, because the most effective way to calm down the mind is not to attend to the breath or anything else, to attend to ourselves. When we attend to ourselves, that directly brings about the subsidence of the mind. That is the most effective way to bring about the subsidence of mind, is to attend to ourselves. And not only is that most effective way to bring about the subsidence of mind, it's the only means to bring about the permanent subsidence of mind. In other words, manonasa. So Bhagavan is not implying that focusing on the breath will lead directly to the self, because the breath is an object. So when he says that ego and breath arise from the same source, in what sense is that? In what sense does he mean that? Well, as he explains elsewhere, only after ego rises, everything else rises. But everything else exists only in the view of ego. So we can say, from our real nature, ego rises. From ego, everything else rises. But the fact that everything else, including the prana, rises from ego, means ultimately, where does it rise from? Where does the mind rise from? From ourself, from what we actually are. So the ultimate source of everything is the same. So the immediate source of the prana and all other things is ego. The immediate source of ego is our real nature. So the ultimate source of everything is our real nature. So in that sense, they arise from the same source. Why Bhagavan emphasizes it? Because Bhagavan wouldn't of his own accord talk about the breath. It's only when he's asked about yoga, he explains the efficacy and the limitations of yoga by either watching the breath or, for more advanced practitioners, controlling the breath. You can bring about the subsidence of mind. In fact, you can bring about the complete subsidence of mind in what is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi, Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi. However, that is only Manolaya, not Manonasa. If you want to bring about Manonasa, there's only one way, as he says in the first sentence of this paragraph, to make the mind subside, or for the mind to subside, there's no adequate means other than vichara, because all other means, including prāṇāyāma, are just a means to bring about the temporary subsidence of mind, not the permanent subsidence of mind. Then you go on to say, a few paragraphs later, it states that the mind sustains the breath in the physical until the time of death, at which time the mind envelops the breath and carries it away. Please explain this. How can this be so? Where does the mind carry the breath? This is a metaphorical way of saying it. Actually, the mind doesn't go anywhere. Well, when death comes, one of two possibilities are there. Usually, when death comes, the mind will subside in a sleep-like state. And sooner or later, it will rise again and start dreaming. Or sometimes the mind goes directly from this waking state into a dream state. So sometimes that's why when people describe after-death experiences, or near-death experiences people have, this is all a dream which is a seeming continuity of this present waking state, which is actually just a dream. So all these near-death experiences are just dream experiences. Not only the near-death experience is a dream experience, what we are experiencing now is a dream experience. So it's just a continuity of that dream experience. So when people talk about rebirth, they often, a term that is used to describe rebirth is transmigration. This term is referring to the idea that when one body dies, the mind migrates to some other body. That's why it's called transmigration. But that is not what, that's one way of explaining it, but that's not the deepest way of explaining it. The deeper way of explaining it is ego is the dreamer. The present life is just a dream. When this dream comes to an end, ego will subside for a while and then begin to dream some other dream. So it's not that ego's gone from place A to place B, because all places exist only within the view of ego. So ego subsides back into its source, it rises again and projects another dream. So when you ask, where does the mind carry the breath to? It simply absorbs it back into itself. That is, all the five sheaths, not only the prana, all the five sheaths are a gross form of the mind. Grosser than ego is the subtlest of the sheaths, which is the Anandamaya kosha or Karana Sarira, the causal body. That is the will. That's all the vasanas. Grosser than the vasanas of the intellect. Grosser than the intellect is the the grosser functions of the mind, the perceptions, memories, and so on, the Manomaya kosha. Grosser than Manomaya kosha is Prāṇāmaya kosha. Grosser than Prāṇāmaya kosha is the Annamaya kosha, the physical body. So when ego subsides at the time of death, all these subside along with it. When ego rises again, it projects a new body, and the breath that it had metaphorically taken with it, it injects into that new body. But we never project a dead body as ourselves. It's always a living body. So metaphorically speaking, the mind has taken the breath from one body into another body. When you're dreaming, the prana is there in that dream body. When you wake up from that dream, you take the prana from the dream body and put it in this dream body, this so-called waking body. In that sense, Bhagavan says the mind takes the prana with it. Wherever the mind goes, it takes the prana with it, because it cannot rise without projecting a body, and part of that body is prana. And then you end by saying there's clearly a direct relationship between mind and body, but it seems like the breath has almost an ego-like existence. No. If we go from the subtlest to the grossest, the breath or prana is the fourth grossest. I mean, if we begin from an Anandamaya kosha, that is the subtlest. Grosser than that is, but even the Anandamaya kosha is gross compared to ego, because ego is the subject, but Anandamaya kosha consists of all the vasanas, which are objects. They're things we experience. We experience likes, dislikes, desires, attachments. We experience the inclinations that give rise to these. So these are all objects. So it's very important to understand. That is why ego is not one of the five sheaths, because all the five sheaths are objects. Ego is the body consisting of five sheaths is the object that ego takes itself to be, but it is not ego. The body, none of the five sheaths are ego. Ego is that which is aware of the five sheaths as I am this body of five sheaths. Marty, is that a clear answer to your question?
Yes. It kind of opens the door for a whole bunch more, but I think I'm not going to ask any more questions today.
If you've got more questions, go and read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. But
no, I've read that many times.
But we need not go down that line. The point is, these are all secondary teachings, because people ask Bhagavan about many subjects, so Bhagavan gave answers about many subjects. But we need to understand what is the focal point of Bhagavan's teachings? Who am I? To whom do all these things appear?
Exactly.
These two questions are the very heart of Bhagavan's teachings. Who am I and to whom? So all these things, this prana is to whom? And whatever appears, to whom does it appear? So
I thought I understood everything until I read that part where it said the mind and the prana have the same source.
Yeah.
And that led to the confusion that led to all the other questions.
Everything has the same source, because ultimately everything comes from ego, and ego comes from ourself. So ultimately everything comes from ourself. So in that sense, yes, they have the same source. But Bhagavan is just explaining here the efficacy of the path of yoga. But he's not recommending that we should follow this path, because he points out by following this path of yoga, all you can achieve is manolaya. You cannot achieve manonasa. And there's no need to achieve manolaya. We achieve manolaya every night when we fall asleep.
Well, the other thing you described is like when the body dies, it's like you're entering a state of manonasa at that point.
No, you're not. It's manolaya.
Manolaya, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a state of manolaya.
Yes, yeah.
You don't have to. You can simply go from one dream to another. But generally, we're tired, so we go to sleep. We can't go
So-
on dreaming forever.
So if you don't realize, that's why we have to realize the self when we're awake in order to kill the ego.
Yeah,
And
when you
ego-
say
so the
awake,
ego will die, so this dream ends.
yeah, exactly. But awake includes, that is, waking and dream are one and the same. People think we can do this only in the waking state. No, we can equally well do it in the dream state. But since we now seem to be in what we now take to be the waking state, let's do it now. Let's not think about doing it in dream. If we're diligent in practicing this now, in this so-called waking state, it will continue even in dream.
I thought Bhagavan said it can only be done in the waking state.
No, no. He said there's no difference between waking and dream.
But can you do self-inquiry in a dream? I mean,
Why not?
consciously, it's like I've been thinking about this, trying to well, how can I carry this over into the dream state?
Yeah, you
And
can.
it's like in the dream, it just seems like I'm more of an observer with whatever's going on. I'm just observing whatever's happening rather than participating
No,
in it.
aren't you participating? If a monster
There's
comes and
there's
starts
an
chasing you, don't you
awareness.
run away?
There's an awareness, and yeah, something like that might happen.
Yeah.
But
Don't you find yourself sometimes on the top of a precipice or something, you're trying to get to some place of safety? We're definitely
yeah,
participators
I've
in
had all
dreams.
kinds of weird dreams, but
Yeah,
in the waking state, you can change your thought. You can always go inward.
you can do
In
the
the
same
dream
thing.
state,
You can
I've
do
never
this-
been able to go inward.
Okay. Well, practice more in the waking state and you'll find it. Often in dreams, suddenly you'll remember, oh, I'm not attending to myself. I'm caught up in all these things. You try to attend to yourself. Sometimes you will find even a small attempt at self-investigation will wake you up, because though there's no substantive difference between waking and dream, generally in waking state, we are more strongly attached to the body. Our attachment to the body in dream is often more tenuous, which is why many dreams seem to be very unstable. One minute you're in San Diego, next minute you'll find you're walking down the street in New York, and you're talking to your long deceased father, and suddenly it's a friend you're talking to. So things are often unstable in dream. That is because the attachment to the body there is attachment to the body, but it's less strong. So it's sometimes said, but waking is a fully blossomed state of ego, whereas dream is a half-blossomed state of ego. But as Bhagavan pointed out, these are all just generalizations, because in some dreams, they're just as stable, just as consistent as this waking state. We sometimes wake up from a dream and it seems so real, it takes us a few moments to adjust to the fact that it wasn't real, because everything was so consistent and it just seemed to be. Or sometimes we wake up, for example, sometimes we wake up in the morning and we get up and begin to go about our day-to-day life, and suddenly we wake up again. The first waking, we thought we had woken up into a waking state, but we'd actually woken up into another dream. So the boundary between waking and dream is a very, very porous boundary. Some dreams are very unstable dreams because of we're not so strongly attached to the body. But that doesn't apply only to dream, even in the waking state. If supposing you're very tired at night and you may be watching a film on television, for example, or reading a book or something, you may find the film very interesting, but at the same time you're being overpowered by sleep. So you'll find yourself in a very unstable state. You're half awake, half sleeping. You're sort of slipping between the waking state and a dream state. So because your attachment to your waking, because of the tiredness, your attachment to a waking body is getting weaker. So you're slowly separating yourself.
Yeah, that drifting into sleep happens more often the older I get too.
Yeah. So as we get older, Bhagavan reminds us more and more how dreamlike this waking state is.
Well, thank you very much, Michael.
Right.
Michael, can I ask one quick question?
Yes, certainly.
Who's
You
talking?
described that, just an addendum, you described that the ego watches everything, it's like a witness. Then,
Yes.
but why can't we know our prior lives? Because the ego watched the death, because the ego doesn't die itself, and the ego projects another dream, like another body, if there's reincarnation. Then should the ego not recall, or is that by purpose?
Well, it's also purpose, but what is a memory? A memory is something known by ego. So memories are all objects. So it is part of, that is, we are blessed with forgetfulness of our previous lives. Even there are many things in this life that we probably have done that we would prefer to forget. So it's good that we have forgotten all the terrible things we've done in previous lives. Or supposing we've done good things in previous lives, it's also good we've forgotten that, because otherwise, oh, I'm such a good person, I did such and such. In my previous life, I was a billionaire and I did so much philanthropy. We'll get a big ego. So forgetfulness is bliss. We are
Marty,
blessed with forgetfulness.
Marty? Not
Yes.
Marty. Michael?
Yes.
Bruce has been waiting about an hour.
Okay. Yeah.
So I tried to go to people in the order they
Okay,
raised
right.
their hand. So Bruce, take it away. Hey, Bruce.
But he said he was working.
I'm here. No, it's really, Michael answered the points very thoroughly. I said, is it because the breath is grosser form than the mind, that if breath is followed, then mind rises again? I think he answered that. And then he also, we hold on to the I thought because it is the first thought, and until the I is eradicated. And the point of that is that the I thought, the I ego is not a kosha. That's a very important aspect of the whole teaching. And I think Michael touched on every single point very clearly.
It is the subject, not an object. That is the important thing to understand.
Exactly. The prana is a grosser form, and mind is, yeah.
Though Bhagavan sometimes tells us to hold on to the I thought, there's actually no I thought to hold on to. When we try to hold on to the I thought, what we're actually holding on to is our own being. That's why he says it's recorded in Maharsha's Gospel, he said at one point, he explained that ego is what is called Chit Jada Granti. And he says, in your investigation into the source of the Ahambriti again means I thought, it's ego. In your investigation into its source, you take the essential chit aspect of ego. So when we try to hold on to ourselves, we are not holding on to the jada aspect of ego, which is the body, consisting of 5 she's. We're holding on to a chit aspect. So it's only metaphorically that we can be said to be holding on to the I thought. Actually, what we're holding on to is only I.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. So thorough, Michael.
It's called holding on to the I thought because the adjuncts haven't yet dropped off entirely. But the more we hold on to I, the more the adjuncts will drop off and the pure I alone will remain.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
We're well into our second hour now. So for all of you, this is your opportunity. I'll take a minute and think about some questions that you'd like to pose to Michael, and I'll get to you as soon as we move in that direction. I wanted to just ask real quickly because it's a follow-up to the last part. I think of Marty's question really struck a chord with me, perhaps with others too. Certainly it did with him, that self-inquiry is possible in the dream state, which I never knew before. But I have learned something interesting about dreams, and that is, in the last 10 years, it dawned on me that if in 3 o'clock in the morning you arise from a dream and you think about it for a second, and it's the call of nature that's arising you to a dream. I found out that I can go back to those dreams. I have the power to will myself back to the continuation of that dream. Doesn't always work, but it works sometimes. Could I go to bed? Could anyone here go to bed at night and voluntarily will themselves into a continuation of self-inquiry in their dreams?
You can certainly try, but there will be a continuity only if it is what is destined to happen. We think we are doing it by willpower, but actually it would happen only if it's our destiny.
So it happens when it happens.
It happens when it happens. And it happens, sometimes you can have a dream at night, and when you wake up in the morning, you can think, oh, that dream I had then, that seemed to be a continuity of I remember having dreamt something like this before. So people say there's no continuity between dream. There is. Often we either dream the same dream again, or we dream very similar circumstances.
Well, I still find what you said to Marty, very important, that self-inquiry can continue in the dream state.
What is the one qualification required for self-investigation? You must be aware that you exist.
Yeah.
Since we're aware that we exist in dream, we're there as the experiencer, so we can turn our attention towards ourselves. To whom is this dream?
Very, very good. So we've got several questions here. We're going to begin with Melissa. We've got a half an hour to go, so keep them succinct if we want to get a lot of questions in. Melissa?
Yes. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
So let me see if I can phrase this adequately. It's very clear that there is one infinite, singular Sat-Chit Ananda. That Sat-Chit Ananda is also referred to as Brahman, and it is clear that the Atman, that an individual awareness of its own being, that Atman is not other than Brahman. That is very clear. As I was listening today to you, another possibility arose, that one could also say that there is, in a sense, only one illusion of ego. There may be a variety of individual bodies that the awareness is conflating with the individual bodies, but the illusion of ego, there's only one illusion of ego.
Yes, absolutely. This is what Bhagavan has taught us. That is, in a dream, because we take ourselves to be a person in that dream, we see many other people, every other person in the dream seems to us to be aware of the same dream as we are. And if you ask anyone in this dream, do you see this beautiful sunset? They'll say, yes, of course I do see it. So everyone in the dream seems to be experiencing the same world. But actually that dream world exists in whose view? There's only one dreamer who's experiencing that. So long as we look outwards, there's the appearance of a multiplicity of egos.
Yes,
but actually,
yes.
that multiplicity of egos exists in the view of one ego.
Yeah.
That's why Bhagavan is always turning our attention back towards ourselves. To whom do this multiplicity of objects, this multiplicity of jivas, this multiplicity of egos appear? So Bhagavan is constantly trying to direct our attention back to ourselves. That's why I said earlier to Marty, the two most important questions in Bhagavan's teachings are, one, who am I? Everyone is aware of who am I. But we shouldn't overlook the importance of the other question that Bhagavan was constantly posing. To whom? To whom? To whom do all these things appear? So yes, nobody's going to deny there's an appearance of a multiplicity of egos. But to whom is that appearance?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. The clarity of that understanding had never entirely appeared, and it's becoming more and more clear.
Bhagavan
Thank you so much, Michael.
Bhagavan slowly is making these things clear to us. Because when we first come to Bhagavan's teachings, we come with a completely different view of the world. We've read so many things, we've learned so many things, we've developed a certain view of the world. Bhagavan's teachings are not just challenging our view of the world, they're completely demolishing our view of the world. So we have to be, it takes time for us to begin to see the world, or to see everything through the eyes of Bhagavan's teachings, and to see the truth in what Bhagavan is telling us. So it comes slowly to all of us.
Thank you.
Slowly, and then, thank you. Thank you very much.
Michael, a quick follow-up on what you said maybe 10 or 12 minutes ago. Vichara is the only way to really tame the mind. Where does that leave meditation then?
Well, it depends there are different types of meditation. One type of meditation is the type of meditation Bhagavan is talking about in verse 7 of Upadeshundya, which is meditating on God with love. That's a means of purifying the mind. Another type of meditation, that also occurs in yoga. I mean, Patanjali does mention Ishvara Pranidhana, that's surrender to God. So God is one of the objects of meditation suggested by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra. But you can people meditate on all sorts of things. People meditate on chakras. They meditate in Vipassana meditation, they meditate on the whole body, trying to scan the body. You can meditate on thoughts. You can meditate on all sorts of things. But the general idea, and you can meditate for different purposes. Meditating on a name and form of God, for example, that will purify the mind, provided you're doing it only for the love of God. Some people meditate on God, hoping to get the blessings of God in order to maybe get their daughters married, or get a promotion in their job, or to people have so many motives for going to churches and mosques and temples and gurudwaras and synagogues and all these things. Just like the outward forms of devotion can be motivated by worldly desires, the inward forms of devotion, such as meditation or japa, people often do these things hoping to gain something from God. But that is not the true love of God, because if we are worshipping God, whether by mind, speech, or body, for some ulterior motive, in order to gain something from God, our love is for what we want to get from God rather than from God himself. That's why Bhagavan begins when he's talking about this subject of nishkamya karma, he emphasizes done for God. That implies done for the love of God. In fact, in the Malayalam version of Upadeshundya, he says Ishvara Pritiyanai, which means it's for the love of God. So if we are meditating on God just for the love of God, that will purify our mind. In yoga, though Patanjali has given room for God in his Yoga Sutra, he's not really dwelling much on the devotion aspect. So yoga, the principal aim in yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, restraining the mental activity. Chitta vritti means mental activity. So in other words, it's trying to reduce the activity of the mind. And the usual way to reduce the activity of the mind is to focus the mind on one object. So the object you focus your mind on, I mean, best is if you're going to focus on an object, to focus on God on a name or form of God with love, because that's the most purifying. But not everyone is attracted to that path of devotion. So you can meditate on anything. You can meditate on a mantra. You can meditate on a chakra. You can meditate on an imagination of a kundalini power, some serpent at the bottom of your spine. You're trying to rouse it and waken it to go upwards. There's so many things you can meditate on. I mean, when it comes to meditation, meditation means fixing the mind on something. So anything that the mind can imagine, it can fix itself on. In yoga, the aim is not that is the principal concern in yoga is restraining the mind. They're not so much concerned about purification of mind, but indirectly, that is provided they're not doing it for some ulterior motive. That is, Patanjali warns in his Yoga Sutra. He talks about acquiring siddhis, that is, supernatural powers. And he says, yes, you can. By yoga, you can acquire supernatural powers, but that is not the aim of yoga. So he warns against that. So it all depends what we're doing, why we are meditating, and what we are meditating on. So there can be so many effects of meditation. Some people meditate just to get a strong, clearly, powerfully focused mind so they can go outwards and achieve things in the world. Because obviously a focused mind is more powerful than a scattered mind.
I think that's why a lot of people simply meditate, to quell the 70,000 strange thoughts careening through our consciousness every
Yes.
day. Very good, thank you. Ronnie, I'm going to get to you next in 1 second, but I talked to a lot of people, plus a lot of people write me emails, texting, on here, direct messaging. I hear from them about the subject of meditation. The point is, I want to say that there are still Ramana devotees, perhaps, presumably many of them, who are not drawn to the practice of meditation for all the good reasons you talked about earlier today. Their question is, would you consider reminding them of the importance of this practice of meditation? Or for some people, is it just simply nothing that's necessary or important?
That is, there are many people who are devoted to Bhagavan. For many people, Bhagavan is a god. So, I mean, they maybe have in their house, they maybe have a picture of Bhagavan and they pray to that picture of Bhagavan, or they may visit Ramana Ashram. But many of the devotees of Bhagavan have not come to Bhagavan for moksha. They come to Bhagavan because Bhagavan is a god and Bhagavan will bless them. So they seek the blessings of Bhagavan. But I mean, that's good. It's good to seek the blessings of Bhagavan. But if we are wise, we will not stop with just seeking to gain something from Bhagavan. Bhagavan has come to bring us the ultimate, the infinite treasure of self-knowledge, of knowing and being what we actually are. So to ask Bhagavan for anything else, it's I mean, if we've got desire for other things, who better to ask than Bhagavan? But why should we desire anything else when Bhagavan has only one desire, to give us the ultimate infinite happiness, but we are all knowingly or unknowingly seeking. I mean, we're all seeking happiness, but the trouble is we think happiness is to be gained from external things. So we think if we pray to Bhagavan to remove this difficulty and to help us to pass our exams, to do well in our interview, to get on in life, the majority of followers of any religion, this is what they're interested in. And we are not much different, but the more we dwell upon Bhagavan's teachings, the more we come to understand that hankering for all these things is futile, because what we are to experience in this life is already predetermined. So praying to God for this or that is good because we're fixing our mind on God. But we're not going to, we think, oh, I prayed to God, so I passed my exam. It's good to believe that because that makes us think more about God, but it's not actually the case. We were already destined to pass that exam, but in order to strengthen our faith in God, that coincided with our prayer. And so we feel, by praying to Bhagavan, I get this. But we need to go I mean, ultimately, this is childish. Asking Bhagavan for this or that is childish. When Bhagavan has come to give us the supreme treasure, why should we pray for petty things? So ultimately, the only thing we should be praying to Bhagavan is the love to surrender ourselves completely to him. And Bhagavan had shown us how to pray for that in 108 ways. Well, not exactly 108 ways, because not all 108 verses of Aksharam are prayers, but in so many ways he's shown us in Aksharam and the other hymns to Arunachala, he's shown us how we should pray and what we should pray for. We should pray for nothing but that love to give ourselves wholly to him, to give up all our desires and surrender ourselves to him, because that is the only way to gain the supreme happiness that we are all seeking. We may want to pass our exam, we may want to do well in our interview, we may want to get a promotion, we may want to get a pay rise, we may want to have a better car, we may want to, if we're in an Indian type society, we may want to get our daughters married. These are all natural things to want, but what we can get from Bhagavan is something far, far, far greater than any of these things. He's already taken care of all. He has allotted for us a prarabdha. So everything we ask him for, if it's good for us, he's already taken care for us. If it's not good for us, he won't give it to us anyway. So we come to Bhagavan to surrender to him. And the way to surrender to him is to follow the path that he's taught us, which is, what is the connection between Bhagavan's path and meditation? Bhagavan's path is the ultimate meditation. Because all other forms of meditation, you're meditating on something other than yourself. In other words, you're meditating on an object, a name or form of God, a mantra, some mental image, or some kundalini, or some chakra, or some. These are all objects. They're things known by us. Whereas Bhagavan says, rather than meditating on any object, meditate on the subject, because the reality of subject, that is God.
Very good. I like that.
The reality of I is God.
Yeah. But one thing you just said a couple of minutes before that really begs the question. You said, you know, many people who come to Ramana because they think of him as God. Isn't that the very definition of duality? The lesson Ramana was here to teach us about?
Yes, but that doesn't stop people. People still, I mean, Bhagavan is God. Bhagavan definitely is God. In Jnana, Bhagavan said, in truth, God and Guru are not different. But though God and Guru are not different, why we have two words, God and Guru? Because they have different functions. God is the one we pray to when we have difficulties, when we want to fulfill this desire or that desire, or to remove difficulty or whatever. That is the function of God. The function of Guru is rooting out ego, the one who has all these desires. So the function of Guru goes beyond the function of God. God is there to bless us, to fulfill our prayers, answer our prayers and everything. Guru will not answer our prayers. Guru is here to kill the prayer, the one who is praying.
I guess I've been wrong then, because I think of the ultimate guru as the self guru who
Yes, of course, the self guru, because who else can annihilate ego? Ego is a false awareness of ourself. So being aware of ourself as we actually are alone can destroy ego. So our real nature is Guru, but that our real nature is what has appeared outwardly in the form of Bhagavan in order to tell us to turn within. That is, Guru is always in our heart as our own being. But because our mind is facing outwards, it's necessary for Guru to appear outwardly in order to tell us to turn within.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully we learn to face outward less and less front of Ramana.
So the function of the outward form of Guru is to turn our mind back to the true form of Guru, which is ever shining in our heart as I. That's why Bhagavan never said, come to me, I will give you moksha. He said, see yourself, you'll find you're ever liberated.
That's what I always thought. Thank you very much. And Ronnie, I apologize to you for not getting it to you as quickly as I said. Take it away with your question.
Oh, thank you. So, Michael, there is duality when in the waking state, in the dream state, but when we go into deep sleep, there is no duality.
Yes.
There is no sense of body, mind, ego, this,
Yeah.
I don't know what to call it, but whatever that is, if it's on a permanent basis, is that what moksha is?
Yes. Moksha is eternal sleep. It's sometimes referred to as Jagrat Sushupti, waking sleep. Because it's the state in which we're ever awake to ourselves and ever asleep to everything else. Because what actually exists is only ourself. Everything else is a mere appearance. And regarding duality, what is the root of duality?
Ego.
Yes, exactly. To whom is duality? So long as we rise as ego, we experience duality. So in waking and dream, we experience duality because we have risen as ego. When ego, as soon as ego subsides in sleep, the appearance of duality disappears along with it. So duality is a projection of ego. Without ego, there is no duality.
So in deep meditation, you can go into a state where everything is suspended. You have no body consciousness, no mind, nothing.
That is what is called Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's a state just like sleep. But as Bhagavan said, that is just manolaya. That is not our aim. Because that's only a temporary state.
So that means that when you reach that state in the waking state, there's nothing to see.
Yeah.
There's no other.
Yeah, but reaching it may be in the waking state, but once we're in that state, we're no longer in the waking state. But by yoga, we can achieve that. Because the aim of yoga is to bring about the cessation of mental activity. When mental activity, so long as there's ego, there's mental activity. So when the mental activity ceases, the ego also subsides. But that is not jnana. That's not manonasa. So Bhagavan, that's why Bhagavan, he told that story of the yogi on the banks of the Ganga just to illustrate that seeking that temporary dissolution of mind is not a worthy aim.
Right.
Because when we wake up with all the same vasanas. So we can destroy the vasanas only in the waking state, not in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, waking and dream states, not in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, because in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the mind itself is absent. So how can you purify an absent mind? So when the mind disappears, all its vasanas disappear along with it. When it rises again, its vasanas come with it. So it's during the waking state or dream state, but one and the same state actually, but we need to, in other words, so long as we rise as ego, we need to try to be turning our attention to ourselves. The more we turn our attention to ourselves, the more we will subside. But the subsidence of ego that is brought about by self-attentiveness will result in manonasa, whereas the subsidence of ego that is brought about by any other means will result in manolaya. That distinction is very important to understand.
No, that I understood, because when I went into deep meditation, I mean, there was no concept of time, me, body, mind, nothing. But like you said, when you come out of that state, you are
You're
affected by everything that's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
exactly.
you realize that it was only for that period.
Yeah.
And so for me, what happened is I looked at meditation as a go-to place so that I could escape what's happening outside.
Yes.
And so it became an addictive procedure to
Right.
which I was drawn into.
Yeah.
And I realized that I need to bring that into my waking state.
Yeah.
So basically, the problem I have in understanding this concept is that in deep sleep or in the deep meditation, there is no I. It's only after you come out of it, you say, oh my God, 6 hours have elapsed, or,
Yes.
you know, whatever.
No I means no I in the sense of ego.
Right. And,
Because
you know,
we exist there and we're aware of our existence there.
Yeah, but it's a blank.
We label it a blank now. We don't call it a blank when we're in sleep or in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's only from the perspective of relative to what we are now experiencing, the multitude of phenomena we are now experiencing. We weren't experiencing those phenomena in sleep or in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So that seems to be a blank. But that's just a mental label we are giving it now. What actually shines in sleep or in Nirvikalpa Samadhi is only ourself. But that which shone in sleep and Nirvikalpa Samadhi is shining even now, as I am. So let's hold on to that and let everything else drop off.
Okay, Ronnie, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Right.
Yeah. Sri Ram, I'm going to ask you to hold on for 1 second because I want to see, we only have 4.5 minutes left, and I want to see if anybody here who hasn't had a chance to talk yet has a very succinct, quick question for Michael. Just speak up if you do. Let's see yes, go ahead, David, real quick.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Michael. My question is simple. Setting aside the question of meditation, if I am nothing other than the self, when I abide in the feeling of love for the self, is this not Atma-vichara?
Maybe. It depends. That is, we are using words. Words are, the words you're using seem to be pointing in the right direction, but I cannot know exactly what you mean by that. That is, love is our own real nature. So to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we thereby subside and remain as we actually are. So being as we actually are is the state of the fullness of love. That's what Bhagavan says. Earlier I talked about verse 9 of Upadeshundya. That's the verse in which Bhagavan says, by the strength of meditation, and what he means by meditation in that context is the meditation he referred to in the previous verse, which is ananya bhava, that is meditation on what is not other. In other words, meditation on ourself alone, self-attentiveness. By the strength of that self-attentiveness, being in the state of being, which transcends all mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. That is the very nature of supreme love.
Yes, thank you. That is what I intended. I know words can be simply pointers to the truth.
Words will always be inadequate.
But I think what I intended was that, given that the self and love, that the self is love itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And insofar as I am attentive to this love,
yeah,
I am engaged in inquiry into the self.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you. And let me see, once we're down to the last minute.
And can I say just one more thing about that? This is very important to understand. The key to self-investigation is love.
Yeah.
Without all-consuming love, just to be as we actually are, we will not be willing to turn our mind within. Because the price to be paid for being as we actually are is giving up everything else. And we pay that price by turning our mind within. So nobody can even begin on this path without love. And nobody can succeed in this path without all-consuming love. So love is absolutely the key. That's why Bhagavan repeatedly said, Bhakti is the mother of Jnana.
It's so powerful what you just said, the way you phrase it, I've never heard before. I'm so glad you said it. You said the price that we pay by turning within. It is a price. And it sometimes bothers people or me to the core. How much do I want to detach from my loving grandchildren, friends?
Bhagavan puts it beautifully in verse 26 of Uludunapadu. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is, that means investigating what ego is giving up everything. So until we are willing to give up everything, until we're willing to surrender completely, we will find every excuse possible for not turning our attention within.
What a powerful note to come to a conclusion on. And Eric in our group just wrote, and it ties right into what you've been saying, melting like wax in fire. Aren't we all?
Bhagavan when Bhagavan was asked who he is, whether he's an incarnation of this God or that God, his reply was, he wrote a 4-line verse. In the first 2 lines, he says who he is. Arunachala Ramana is Paramatman, but it blissfully exists as awareness in the cave of the heart lotus of all different jivas, beginning with Hari. Hari means Lord Vishnu. So from the highest God down to the smallest insect, that which is shiny as awareness, as the awareness eye in all, that is Arunachala Ramana. So first he reveals who he is. Then, but he doesn't just ask us to believe that. How can we experience that for ourselves? That's what he explains in the next 2 lines. And he begins with the word Parival Ulam Uruha, heart melting with love. When one reaches that cave where the sublime, the cave where that sublime supreme dwells, the eye of awareness opening, you will know this reality. You'll know the reality of yourself. It will reveal itself. So there he said, those words are such beautiful words. Parival means by love. Ulam means heart. Uruha means melting, heart melting with love. That is the key to this. Without that love, nobody succeeds in this path.
Should be required to touch upon this.
In this context, I would just say one more thing.
Yes.
Generally, there's a very widespread belief, both among Advaitins and non-Advaitins, but Advaita is the path of Jnana, and Advaitins look down on the path of Bhakti as an inferior path. Whereas all the other schools of Vedanta, they criticize Advaita and say, no, Bhakti is superior to Jnana. Bhagavan comes and gives us the impartial verdict. But Bhakti and Jnana are one and the same. You cannot have Jnana without Bhakti. So Bhagavan though Bhagavan is a staunch Advaitin, he always insists that you cannot have Advaita without Bhakti. Bhakti is the absolute key to Advaita. So Bhagavan is a samarasa. He's given an equal verdict. So Bhagavan represents, though we can say Bhagavan is an Advaitin, actually he's a Vedantin. He represents the best of all the different schools of Vedanta. He's equal to all. Because Bhagavan will never say Jnana is superior to Bhakti, or that Bhakti is superior to Jnana. You can't have one without the other. They're one and the same thing.
That's great. Really, really wonderful. We're going to end in about 30 seconds because
And Bhagavan has lived that in his own life. He sang that, the Arunachal Stuti Panchakam, pouring out his love.
What?
So for people who want to worship name and form, you can take Arunachal Stuti Panchakam as a worship of the name and form of Arunachala. For those who want to turn within, he clearly says Arunachala is what is shining in the heart as I. So he's given us a broad path that embraces people of all bents of mind. And in many of the Bhakti traditions of Vedanta, they say the highest form of Bhakti is what they call the Matara Bhava. That is the Bhava that is expressed, like the love between Krishna and the gopis, the love that is expressed between the God is the man and the jivas are the female. Bhagavan, in that very same Bhava, Bhagavan sang Aksharamlai. Bhagavan is the bride coming for that eternal, immutable marriage with Arunachala.
Are you sure you said enough on this? It's wonderful. You can't.
I can't say enough. I can't say enough.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to have to call it quits for a day, but hang on because I have a comment later after people start leaving for Lonnie. Oh, she's still and Robert. But I want to thank you. Where did you go, Michael?
I'm here.
Okay.
I think I'm here.
On the page. Thank you so much. We'll see you next in July. And I also wanted to say to Sri Ram, who's been very patient here, I'm glad you had a chance to ask your question earlier. You have another question to ask, but you were going to be the second person's question if we got around it beyond the first question today. This is our second month in a row that Michael's been so generous with the first question because we haven't gotten the second, but we certainly filled the time with 100%. Really from the heart.
But
Wonderful.
I think it was a useful first question, and it often by answering one question, we can clarify so many other aspects of Bhagavan's teachings along with it.
Yeah, and you require
because Bhagavan's teachings are a coherent whole. So if we start dealing with one aspect, we can't deal with any aspect of Bhagavan's teachings without bringing in so many other aspects of Bhagavan's teaching, because they're all tied together as one coherent whole.
Yes, you referred to that as the background that you felt compelled to do, and I'm glad you did. Because that did exactly what you had to say later on. Thank you very much, and take all the time you want. Next time on the first question, it doesn't matter because people do have a chance to come with follow-up questions later. Thank you, Michael. See you in July. Have a great month ahead.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
All thanks to Bhagavan.